Welcome to Grief and Brief with Henry Ford St. Castles. This is Peggy, and today we are here with a guest to honor Pregnancy and Infant Loss Month, which is in October, but that's just the day or the month of the year that we really talk about it. It happens all year long, and it is definitely, I believe, something that the world doesn't talk about enough and support people. So thank you to Brandon Movitz for joining us from Pierce Foundation, which is, I truly think, an amazing tie-in of your name of your foundation. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
Yeah, so my second born son, right in the middle of COVID, May of 2020, I found him dead next to me at 3 months, just shy of 3 months old. And it really changed the course of my life. We'll get into the grief and all the other things, but I knew right away through the love that people had showed me, and I knew that I wanted to help other people and that I had an opportunity because basically I could pay for my funeral, but I found out through different grief programs I was in that wasn't the case for other families around me. And so I started Pierce Forever Foundation in efforts to help other families pay for their funerals or burials or related things. And we built some grief programs, and that's essentially what Pierce Forever is. And that's, I think, an important part of my story.
Pierce's life has impacted many based on what you have created in his honor. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being out there for families. Today we were talking about really how the world is challenged when you approach someone, and you certainly have had experiences where, you experienced the loss of Pierce and others. And we talked a few years ago on a Grief and Brief about the word grief allies, of how we can be, as a community, surround and support families who are in grief. And that is definitely a need. As I sit in groups and listen to families, it's amazing to me how people can say the wrong thing to people, but then at the same time, where do you get the education? It's certainly not in any schooling, right? So it's maybe cultural. So let's see what we can do to kind of help people know what to say to others.
Let's start with, I think, the most important things are what not to say. I think oftentimes people mean well. Like, for instance, one of the things that I think they say as a compliment, faith-based people, at least he's in heaven, at least they're in heaven. I don't know. It could go both ways. For me, that doesn't always land well. I know the intention is there. I think when you're grieving, you hold on to words, you overthink things. So that seems to be one that, at least for me, it didn't land well. I heard once, at least you have other kids. That was after my stillborn, after Pierce died, I lost another child. And that one for me, I don't know. That's probably good intentions, or someone wasn't thinking. But I think the worst thing, worse than any words, is silence. I think we talk about ally. I think, just to kind of keep it broad, you're either an ally or you're not. You either care for someone and you want to try and be there for them in however you're able to do that. Maybe that's words. Maybe that's just cooking for someone and dropping it off. It doesn't always have to be something that you say. It's often more the things that you do, at least for me, that have impacted me more than anything.
I kind of like the idea of you're either an ally or you're not, because it's a choice. Right?
You're either aiming to help somebody and maybe carry a piece of their grief. Maybe it's just by dropping off some cookies. My wife had in part of her Bible study and book club. She just has a huge positive community around her, and they had some sort of dinner train we weren't obviously not really aware of, but pretty much every day people would drop off dinner for us. And I mean, the generosity, just for me, it filled me with love. And in that time, that's what I needed. And that helped me survive those terrible moments.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those trains are really powerful things. So the idea, I'm going to take it one step backwards. So the idea of that at least, there is something about the at least statement. And sometimes I think that it's a difference between support and comfort. And the idea that you need to comfort someone in their grief, I need to give you something that's good about it, right? So at least he's in heaven. Now I'm giving you something that's good that you can focus on. And would you agree? Like, the reality is there's there's nothing other than bringing him back that's going to solve this problem, right?
Right. I think they say that with some sort of intention of alleviating some of the pain or helping you have some sort of positive spin on it. And you're right. There's no words that are really going to help alleviate that pain when you're feeling it. I think people maybe listening to this can walk away with a couple easy things to do. Like right away, I would write down some dates, put it in your calendar, make it a yearly occurrence, birthday, death date, Mother's Day, Father's Day, whatever's relevant to the loss, right? I mean, I've dealt more with losing children. I lost a brother-in-law too. Whatever it is, write those days down, because even my own mother has forgotten to send me a message. And it's not that I need it, but it hurts more when people don't say something, like in that instance, than when they do, right? So it's not really the words that someone says. I think a lot of people get wrapped in what would I say on this baby's birthday, and maybe that's hard for them. I mean, for me, the best texts are like, say on Pierce's birthday, thinking of you today with a heart. You know, people usually send me a yellow heart, thinking of you, right? Something like that. That goes further than the right words and writing a paragraph. I know my sister oftentimes, I don't think she does this intentionally, on say a day like that, she'll just send me a heart. That's all I need. I know they're thinking of me. I know she's thinking of me. And that goes a really, really long way. I think even just sitting with somebody, being with somebody, taking them out, it's not the words it's not me being there with you and trying to comfort you by talking to you about the loss. It's just maybe me coming over for dinner and we're talking, for me, watching a sports game, going for a walk or doing something to keep your mind off of when you're sitting alone and you have too much time to think, which is typically a dangerous place in the grief world, I think. Too much time alone to think.
Yeah, you can spiral easily. So that companionship, and the companionship doesn't have to have the perfect words. It just needs to have the heart, be it in a text message or in an in-person invitation. So what do you think? And this seems to be sometimes a controversial discussion about the phrase, I'm sorry.
Elaborate
I don't think
on
there's
that.
a right answer. Let me clarify. I should always say that. I just had this discussion the other day in a group, and I was like, I learned from teenagers, actually, because I never thought about it before. And there was a couple of teenagers in one of our groups, and two of them were like, I hate it. So I was like, oh, I didn't really. And I think it's a broad range of opinions, but I'm curious on what you think.
You mean that someone's saying like, I'm sorry for your loss, or in what terms?
Yeah,
I'm
sorry for your loss.
It's never been something to bother me or that I've even thought twice about.
Okay, that just kind of reiterates that it's an okay phrase to say.
Yeah.
You've already said, like, also in adjustment to that, you can also just simply give the love. I'm thinking of you. It's the thought. I think there's no perfect words that are gonna.
No, it's the classic, the thought that counts. That's it. Someone doesn't have to be dead. It doesn't have to be something like in that sense where you're comforting them there. They could just be sick for you to do, just acts of kindness. Some things aren't even intentional. So I just like to bring this up. Like for me, I'm having my fourth living child, knock on wood, things are great. If everything goes well, we just had our 20-week ultrasound, everything looks great.
Congratulations.
But people all the time ask me, how many children do you have? I've had lots of children and I'm young and all these things. And they don't mean that intentionally. And after Pierce died, do I say one? Do I say two? You want to hold on to their memory. And so saying one felt wrong. And I'm a real authentic person. My wife even still will be out, and typically it's with someone that doesn't know our family. We'll be out and someone will say, how many children do you have? She'll say 4. I've got 3 living children at home right now, but she says 4. For me now, I just say 3, right? But it took me a long time, and it really amplified my grief. I had guilt. I went through all these things after I leave a conversation, and why did I even have to bring this person into my situation? I could have just said 1 and moved on. They don't care. They don't know, and I'll never see them again. But I think, like we said, you overthink things when you're grieving, and you want to feel right in your heart at all times if you can.
So what is your go-to answer? Does it depend on who's asking?
It depends. And, I'm 5 years out. And like I said, with Pierce, his memory lives on through our nonprofit.
Yeah.
He's changed many lives. He brought me to Christ, and I grew up Jewish and probably was as far away from there as I possibly can. And he's changed lots of other lives along the way. So I've had lots of time to reflect and let go of things and, mold the situation, let's just say. With Hearth, my baby who I had a stillborn, I still struggle with it. I'll deal with a funeral of somebody who has a similar loss, and it'll bring back things where I've somewhat buried, if you will, where I have to move on at some point. I have lots of things going on, and it gets complicated. So now it's a little easier. I say 3 and one more coming, but I've had peace with some of the things in the past to be able to get there. It's taken time.
That's your grief work. That's your grief journey.
And grief changes. When Pierce died, I was filled with love. It felt like I had the hand of God on me. I think part of it was all of the beautiful things that were happening around us, with the love and support that our friends really stepped it up. For months where people were messaging me every day, checking in with me, dropping off food, dropping off everything you can think of and more. And then, as you know, it kind of goes quiet, right? People stop messaging you and things stop coming in, and you realize that you're really alone with your family and your tight knit circle. Even your parents probably stop. And how long can people be checking in on you? At some point, I kind of got annoyed with people checking in on you. Okay, I'm fine, or I'm fine right now. A couple hours ago I was down, now I'm up, right? So it's complicated, but that's part of being an ally, I think, is not really worrying about doing the wrong thing, because you can't always get it right. You're not always going to message somebody when they're in the right place to hear it or not, right? So it's just being with that person and, like we said, being committed to being an ally and being with them as opposed to being without them.
Okay, so outside of your foundation, because you significantly help and hold families who are going through that, who are in need, especially from a financial standpoint, as well as care. If you had someone who was not going to your foundation and you were talking to someone and they had the loss of an infant or a child, what would be, like, let's say 3 things that you would do to support that family based on your experience? What would be a recommendation for, like,
being an ally? I think just checking in on them, just showing them that I have been thinking of them and I care for them, and showing that to them. I have one friend that he obviously has reminders on his phone, like I had said, but when I wake up on one of these mornings, he messages me, and it's pretty short, but he makes me feel like he's there with me. And it's definitely not by the words that he's saying, so just make someone feel like you care. Show them, is it empathy? Show them that, right? Make them feel that, feel the love. So I think that's probably the most important thing. And I think that's the broad category, and how that looks can be many ways, because everyone probably can give that in different ways. I'll try and think of 2 and 3, because that one is like pretty much it. I don't know if you need 2 or 3. I think that's really it for me.
That's powerful, because that shows how powerful that is. So then the key of being an ally is to just show up. You don't necessarily have to say the perfect thing. It's like the heart in the text message. Just be aware and show up.
I think in part of that, like we were kind of mentioning, by showing up, don't make the person do more work. And I'll give you a couple quick examples of that. Messaging someone, hey, I want to get you dinner. What can I get you? What are you in the mood for tonight? I know the intention is nice there. That's not really making it easier on someone. Now you're almost putting the burden on someone. One, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're not. Don't worry if they eat the food that you bring. It's an unconditional gift that you're giving them. Don't check back in. Did you like this? How was it? Maybe they didn't eat it. Maybe they gave it away. It doesn't really matter, right? So I remember someone dropping off cookies for us, and they maybe they were special cookies to them. I'm not a big sweets guy, and I didn't eat it. I wasn't in the mood. I was really on a quest to feel my best afterwards. I was in survival mode, and I wanted to do everything I could to survive it. And sugar definitely isn't for me something that I think is going to help my emotional capacity or physical capacity. Anyways, I felt so guilty lying to them about it, and then they followed up about it, and it's like, it doesn't matter. So whatever you do, just give selflessly. And I think the same way with if you're checking in on somebody, saying how are you, that's just kind of a typical thing. I mean, like I said, after Pierce died, I was overthinking everything. And I'd pass someone in the hallway, hey, what's up? How are you? I mean, that would derail me just thinking, how do I answer this? How am I today? Am I good? That kind of thing. So try to just give someone something that doesn't hurt their grief. And you may have to think for a little, you may have to think a little extra about it, or you may have to alter what you would typically do, you know. So I think that's a really important thing. And again, somebody they might not have a loss yet. Maybe they have a child that's just in the hospital and they're not doing well. They probably don't have a lot of hope in certain circumstances. Don't ask them for updates or whatnot. Just make them feel like you're there for them, that you care for them, right? It doesn't have to be something that you're looking for an answer. It's not for you. It's for them.
Yeah, that's very good words of wisdom there. When you give a gift, give a gift. Don't expect anything in return. Don't expect like feedback and understand that a grieving family is grieving. And if nobody's ever gone through that, I mean, not everybody, just understanding that you don't get it. If you haven't stood in those shoes, you don't get it. Everyone's grief is unique. And so just honoring where that person is and where that family is and allowing them to do what they need to do.
I think that's another important thing to talk about. Grief looks different to everybody. And for myself, just for myself, I'm a pretty high functioning person. I do a lot. A lot of my friends really didn't check in on me, really didn't, and still don't. Pierce's birthday this year, I don't care that my friends check in or not. But the fact that almost none of my friends outside of the one I mentioned really didn't, it hurt me. It just made me think, why am I so lonely and in this day? And I think part of it is because people see me, and although from afar I'm doing well, I'm helping people, I'm in a positive place, and all those things are true. But also it's nice to feel the love, and so even both things can be true, right? And so I would just overly be an ally, overly try to be there for somebody, and don't think, oh, just because this person isn't showing me that they're sad or upset or in more of these negative places in grief, doesn't mean that you don't have to be there for them. Again, I think myself is probably the gold standard of that, because I pretty much carry things, at least, maybe outside of my house. Inside my house may be a little different, but outside my house, to the naked eye, I'm not just living through my grief, I'm thriving through it, you know? So, but again, that's not always true.
Having Pierce and Hearth's name said, do you think that people don't bring it up because they don't want to make you more sad? Sometimes when I greet somebody and they've experienced a death, I'm like, what was the person's name? Tell me the person's name. Because I think there's power in saying their name. Whether it's been a month or 10 years, there's power in acknowledging that person.
I think it almost gives form to the feelings. A lot of people go silent instead of being a friend, instead of being an ally, instead of being there. They go silent because they don't know what to say, because they don't want to even hear how you are, because they know the answer is probably not well. They ignore that altogether. And again, you don't really have to ask, but you can show that you care for somebody and that you do wonder how they are just by being with them, right? You don't have to ask the question. I think it's an exact similar thing. Harder for me to articulate, with saying the word, but I think it's the exact parallel. I think it's important to say. Maybe it hurts, maybe it brings up some emotions. That's not always a bad thing. I think hearing the baby, if it's a baby, or it doesn't have to be a child, I think just hearing that name really helps part of the healing process. Just the acknowledgement that human, even though that's not here right now in physical form, that there is still something that remains. And that's part of what grief is. It's like we talk about the love that remains, or right, just because you don't see the cloud doesn't mean the things that made up the cloud doesn't exist anymore. So I think part of saying the name and just being there for somebody is part of that recognition of the love that was there at some point, and physically may not be there to show it anymore.
I don't know if you've watched the TV show Marvel, WandaVision. Like
Mm-mm.
in the end of the TV show, that she has recreated a world where her husband has come back and they had children and they're living this when it's just all a fantasy, shall we say. And so in the end, where they know that it's going to fall apart and she's saying, I can't survive the grief. I just can't do it. But then he says, you can survive it. And he's like, because of the love. And what is love if not grief? Or what is grief if not love persevering? So what is grief if not love persevering? The concept of that, like you said, I love that cloud idea. Like just because the cloud isn't there doesn't mean all the parts of it aren't still there. So I think that death can do a lot of things in the world that are not good. It cannot take away love.
I don't think I said the word grief before I lost Pierce. And now it's like, I think a vital part of who I am and part of how I want to help others, because I've learned so much and I found ways to work through it. A lot of it is through journaling and things that I wasn't really interested in before that I found have really helped move that grief around, right? Or even discover things, emotions, dig up things I didn't know were stuck inside of me. One of the things is the family grieves entirely different at different times. Maybe there's overlap, maybe there's not. I found that with Pierce, my wife and I were grieving completely different in completely different ways at different times. And only recently have found more of the anger side of the grief. And, there's lots of layers to it, but she had that earlier. So when I was filled with love and joy at first, and she was quite the opposite, naturally. And that's not where I wanted to be. I think that was just my way of surviving. And I have a positive psychology background. So I was really digging into some of these things and really leaned into faith. And I would come home excited, and she was as far in the opposite direction as possible. Right. And so we had to learn how to navigate each other. And I think we still are. A lot of that's just communication. But you talk about adding another child into the mix of that. I had a 2.5 to 3-year-old. So part of it is just, words weren't necessarily going to be the way to explain things to him or work through his emotions, but we had to show him that love, and that I would continuously say Pierce's name, no matter how hard that was for me. So I almost had to be an ally to my son, right, and to my other family, because the Pierce's grandparents, our parents, they're grieving too, right? And so you have to help each other as much as you're trying to help yourself. And I think that's just part of what the ally is you got to learn how to be an ally to yourself.
Yeah, well said. Communication, then, you mentioned, is like a key, and respect for others to be in a different process in their grief, or a different point in their grief, expression of the grief. When you talk about grief, you talked about the stages being not quite how you like to look at it, or because it's not quite right. Just stages is not the right word, but I will think of like a spaghetti map. Somewhere in my world, I've learned of, like, you take a plate of spaghetti, you throw it on the wall, and it just is like a spaghetti map, right? It's just all over the place. A plate of spaghetti would be grief.
That's a better way to look at it. Yeah.
No clear path. Okay, here's a question. What would you say if you were to be able to, like, look forward as you go on, how people can support people in the long run? So clearly the date in the calendar is an amazing idea. Put the dates in the calendar, just send the heart, send the thinking of you, or send the, if you want, I'm happy to get a cup of coffee and talk if you are a person who wants to hear. What about future? Like, I sometimes think down the line, right? There's going to be a day when it's his 18th birthday, or a day when, He's 30. Same thing.
I can
Would it be
I
the
can
same
only
thing?
speak for myself because I think everyone's going to feel a little different about it. A part of why I started Pierce Forever is because I really believe that you need a place to visit. And so we really focus on burials because I like to encourage people to have something that they can go to honor their child. What that could be Mother's Day or Father's Day, or that could be Christmas or Easter or their birthday or the death date. It could be any of those things or all of those things. But for me, that was a really important thing and a tangible physical place to go. And like I said, I met some fathers in an early grief group that they buried the child but couldn't have the gravestone because they couldn't afford it. And that was part of my main motivation. But I would encourage people, even so, I think Pierce, 2 to 3 months old, he lived here on Earth. It's easier to imagine having a gravestone for him. But Hearth, things get a lot, really complicated when you have any type of miscarriage or, infant or death in utero, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter the reason, it doesn't matter how it happened. I think still being able to, if you have a urn, cremation, even if you can't get the remains, which if it's too early, sometimes you can't, you could still do something and have an urn or it could be a tree, it could be anything, but something that you can go to honor in that way. We've helped families. They didn't want to have something physical, and so we planted a tree, and they can go. It's at a playground or some places like that. At a school, they can go and honor their child. To me, I think that's a really important thing. And I think it gives your grief something to do. It gives you a way to honor that child. It's just so hard. I was fortunate enough in one way to have a gravestone for Pierce. And so I did the exact same thing, just smaller for Hearth. And I'm so thankful that I did that because I don't know if I would have in different circumstances, but I can go there and honor him as much or as little as I want, and I found lately I don't go as much as I used to, but I put a bench there and I could sit there, and sometimes I go for 2 minutes and sometimes I'll go and spend a couple hours, and it's something that some place that I can go. And I think that's a really good exercise to do. I'd say something for me that doesn't help is, so we have a really big friend group and we had 5 friends that had babies right when Pierce was born in like the same, say, 6-week window. And so it was pretty difficult, and it's less now, but it was really difficult to be around those children and to just, Pierce would have been 1 year old. They're all celebrating the 1 year birthdays, and here I am not having anything to celebrate. You start to think about things like that. But now fast forward, all those, boys and girls are 5 years old, and I love being around them. And there's something that makes me feel more connected to Pierce that way. But something that I've never done, at least recently, is think, what would Pierce be doing at 5 years old? I don't like to do the hypothetical. I don't think that's ever helped me early on. And I learned I just don't have those thoughts. And if I do, I try and get away from them pretty quick. I think other people, maybe that's helpful for them. But to me, it just brings up negative places that I don't want to be in. I've learned in life, not just in this circumstance, those type of thoughts usually aren't helpful. And so I have to consciously say, okay, I'm moving away from that. He's not here. I'm not thinking about, what he would be doing, where he would be, So for my advice is to try and stay away from that. But again, maybe for someone else that's somehow helpful.
Fair. Good. But I definitely can hear and understand what you're saying, and that makes total sense. Focus on the impact that he had and not on the things that you don't have, right?
It could be difficult, Pierce, at least he lived and, we were together and it was COVID. So every day, as opposed to now we're, off to work quite a bit. So we have a lot of memories together. I have lots of pictures. I have all those things. It's so difficult with a baby you've never met, you've never seen, you've never held, as a man, you've never carried, right? It's so hard to be connected to that baby. And so, and there's not a lot of people talking about miscarriages, stillborns, any type of those losses, and I still struggle with it, right? And because Pierce pretty much every time trumps Hearth is loss, people never really mentioned it and still don't mention it. And I still find it so hard to navigate that situation. I'm still learning quite a bit about my own grief in that space. And um, I don't have a lot of advice there, right? But like I would assume the same. I'm not thinking he would be 2 years old right now and where he would be doing. That just makes me feel bad about the situation, and it doesn't send me into the best mental place. And that's okay sometimes. I think there's positive places in grief where you can feel your sadness and you can express those things. But to me, that's not a useful exercise. I'd rather write a poem about it, draw a picture, do some art. I've got some art around here. I do some splatter art. I just do some stuff. But those are a way for me to just kind of, I don't know what I'm feeling. I'll just do something that's a good exercise. It gets some stuff out of me that I didn't even know I had.
I love how you are able to kind of take a look at what that is and whatever those thoughts are, right? Our thoughts are not facts, they're just thoughts. So like kind of you're assessing this one is not helpful. And so I need to move away from that. I need to not think of that. And you've mentioned multiple coping skills or tools that you're using to really get that stuff outside of your body, right?
So what is that,
And
catharsis?
yeah. We don't want it all the negativity. The more that we can get that grief and the heaviness of the grief outside of the body through the writing, through the journaling, through the art, through all of that, the lighter that it can feel.
Even things like exercise, I mean, however that looks, it could be something, probably pretty useful, like boxing or something that might get some aggression out. For me, I like to lift weights. That's something that has typically in my past gotten a lot of negative feelings out. And then, you have good neurotransmitters and things that happen that make you feel good after you're done. So I think that's like something physical that pretty much always helps. Not many people regret going to the gym or doing a little bit of light exercise. It's hard to feel bad after that, as long as you don't hurt yourself. But yeah, I think doing nothing and sitting still and just watching TV or being on your phone or all those things, none of it really lets that grief get out. I just think that there's other tools that I've continued to add to my arsenal, like different types of therapies, counseling and stuff like that. But explore, like I like to write poems. I found ways to do it where I basically think of a sentence. It could be anything, and it doesn't even have to be something I'm feeling. Today I'm feeling, pick any word, positive, negative, whatever. And then I just choose that last word and I look up rhymes with it. And what I do is, as part of the exercise for me, is by looking through all those words, I build the next sentence, and that helps get stuff out that I never even thought was there. Because I'm, instead of just blank slate journaling, I seem to have some structure, and it really helps move the grief around for me. And I think it's a really, really nice exercise. And, with the internet, you can, when I talk to people, they're like, I don't know how to rhyme. I don't really either. I look it up. And I think that's part of the exercise, is going through the words, because it forces you to think of, today I'm sad, bad, mad. You think of all these things and then you form a sentence. It's a really, really good tool to have. And you don't even have to have a loss to benefit from that exercise. But I think it's a really, really important thing for people to do similar things like that,
Great idea. You got to try it. And if you like it, then keep doing it. And if you don't like it, then move on to the next one and try something else.
Yeah. Music is a really easy thing, I think words carry a lot more weight when you've had a loss. I listen to songs from my childhood or even before when I was born, that I didn't like back then. And now they're so moving. I think as an ally, you can expose people to these things that are going through a loss or hard times. And you never know, sending somebody a song, what's the worst that happens? Maybe it hits them the wrong way. You have to be willing to take that risk, right? And that's what we talked about with an ally. Make someone feel like you're thinking of them. if you have some inclination to text somebody or to message somebody, it's probably for a good reason. So don't overthink what the message needs to be. Just send them something, an emoji, a GIF, whatever, right? A meme. It doesn't really matter what it is. Anything is better than nothing. It makes that person feel loved.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And to extrapolate that out, I think that should go across. I think working in the field of grief and loss, or experiencing grief and loss, what you see in a new way is the value and importance of life, and saying and speaking your truth to someone when they are alive. So if you have that moment, even for just a friend or a relative, like send the text, send the message when they're here, right? My dad used to be like, he'd say, he was Danish, and he always would talk about red and white flowers, like, but give them to me when I'm alive, not when I'm dead. Like, they don't mean anything to me when I'm dead.
Right.
So yeah. So I think that concept of just like, another gift that these experiences can give us is the value of living fully while we're here.
Beautifully said. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brandon. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you're doing in the world to help people and your family. So yeah, you're welcome. All right. Well, that's a wrap. Everyone take care out there. Until next time.
Have a great day.